She stepped off the train into hell, dust devils spinning across cracked earth, vultures circling overhead, and waiting at the end of the platform wasn't the white rancher from the letters, but a man whose dark eyes held the weight of a war she didn't know she'd just entered. Elena Hartwell had buried her father 3 weeks ago, sold everything she owned to pay his debts, and traveled 800 miles to marry a stranger because starvation was slower than hope. But the hope standing before her wore buckskin and war paint, and the town behind him looked ready to burn them both alive. She had no money for a ticket home, no home to return to, and in 5 seconds she would have to decide, run toward a certain death or stay and face an impossible one. If you want to see how a preacher's daughter survived the brutal frontier and changed the fate of an entire territory, stay with me until the end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Missouri River had long since disappeared behind the train's black smoke, and with it, everything Elena Hartwell had ever known. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the green hills surrender to endless brown plains, trying not to think about the fact that she was riding toward a man whose face she'd never seen. The letter was folded in her pocket, creased soft from reading. Respectable landowner, good prospects, seeking a wife of Christian character. The words had felt like a lifeline when she'd found the advertisement in her father's study, 3 days after they'd buried him in ground so hard the gravediggers had cursed the clay. She pulled the letter out again, even though she'd memorized every line. Miss Hartwell, your reply has brought me great hope. I own land in Arizona Territory, and I am in need of a partner who values faith and hard work above material comfort. If you are willing, I will meet you at the Sentinel Station on the 15th of June. Yours, in respect, T. Ashwood. T. Ashwood. She'd imagined him a dozen different ways. A widower, perhaps, worn but kind. A farmer with sun-darkened hands and a quiet smile. Someone decent enough to place an ad instead of taking a woman by force, which was more than could be said for half the men west of St. Louis. The conductor's voice cut through her thoughts. Sentinel! Next stop, Sentinel! Her stomach twisted. She smoothed her black morning dress, checked that her hat was pinned straight, and gripped the handle of her single carpet bag. Everything she owned was inside it. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver hair comb, and the last $5 she had in the world. The train lurched to a halt in a cloud of dust and steam. Elena stood, legs shaking, and made her way to the door. The heat hit her first, dry, vicious, nothing like the humid Missouri summers. It sucked the moisture from her throat in seconds. She stepped down onto the platform and looked around. Sentinel was barely a town. A strip of sun-baked buildings slouched against the horizon like broken teeth. A saloon, a dry goods store, a livery stable, and what might have been a hotel, though the sign was too faded to read. A few men loitered in the shade, hats pulled low, watching her with the lazy menace of vultures. And at the far end of the platform, standing alone, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark trousers and a plain shirt, his black hair loose past his shoulders. His skin was bronze, his features sharp and unreadable. He didn't move, didn't smile, just watched her with eyes like polished stone. Elena's breath caught. She looked around wildly, searching for someone else, anyone else. But the platform was empty except for the loiterers, and they weren't paying her any attention. They were watching him. She forced herself to walk forward, each step heavier than the last. When she was 10 feet away, she stopped. Mr. Ashwood? Her voice came out thin, uncertain. He inclined his head, a gesture so slight it was almost nothing. Miss Hartwell. His voice was low, measured, with an accent she couldn't place, not the drawl of the South or the clipped precision of the East. Something older. She swallowed hard, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like the scream building in her chest. I think there's been some mistake. No mistake. He took a step closer, and she flinched. He stopped immediately, his expression unreadable. You are Elena Hartwell. I am Tarek Ashwolf. We have a contract. Ashwolf. The name landed like a stone in her gut. Not Ashwood. Ashwolf. Your letter said... My letter said the truth. I own land. I need a wife. You agreed. You lied about who you are. I wrote my name clearly. His gaze didn't waver. You saw what you wished to see. Behind her, one of the men on the platform spat into the dust. Savage's got himself a white woman. That's bold, even for him. Elena's face burned. She turned back to Tarek, her hands shaking. I can't. This isn't. You have no money, Tarek said quietly. No ticket home. No home to return to. Your father's debts took everything. You came here because you had no other choice. He paused. That has not changed. Rage flared in her chest, hot and bitter. So you think you can just keep me? Like property? No. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I think you can choose what happens next, but you should know what you are choosing between. He gestured toward the town. You can walk into Sentinel and ask for help. They will give you none. You are a woman alone, with no money and no protection. The best you will find is work in the saloon. The worst, you already know. She did. She'd seen what happened to women like that. Desperation had teeth. Or, Tarek continued, you can come with me. You will have food, shelter, and safety. You will be my wife in name, but I will not touch you without your consent. If, after one season, you wish to leave, I will take you to the nearest mission and give you enough money to start again. Elena stared at him, her heart hammering. Why would you do that? Because I need a wife the settlers will recognize. A woman who can stand between my people and theirs and prove that peace is possible. His gaze was steady, unflinching. And because you need a chance to survive, we can give each other that. Your people. She barely whispered it. You're Apache. Yes. The word hung in the air like smoke. She thought of every story she'd ever heard. Massacres, raids, scalps taken and bodies left to rot in the sun. Her father had preached about the savages in the West, the godless heathens who lived like animals. But the man in front of her didn't look like an animal. He looked tired and honest. If I say no, she asked, then I will leave you here and you will do what you must to survive. She looked past him toward the dusty road that led out of town. She could see horses in the distance, and beyond them the jagged silhouette of mountains. She had $5. No skills, no friends, no family. She looked back at Tarek. One season, he agreed. And you swear you won't... She couldn't finish the sentence. I swear, he held out his hand, on my honor and the honor of my people. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she took it. His grip was firm, warm, and surprisingly careful. Come, he said, we have a long ride. They rode in silence. Tarek had brought a second horse, a steady gray mare with kind eyes. Elena climbed into the saddle with trembling hands, grateful that her father had at least taught her to ride. They left Sentinel behind, heading east into the desert. The land was brutal. Endless stretches of sand and rock, dotted with scrub brush and skeletal cacti. The sun hammered down without mercy, and the air shimmered with heat. Elena's throat was dry within an hour, her skin tight and burning. Tarek handed her a canteen without a word. She drank sparingly, watching him from the corner of her eye. He rode like he'd been born in the saddle, moving with the horse instead of against it. His face was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't offer explanations or apologies. He simply rode. After 2 hours, they reached the edge of a canyon. Tarek dismounted and led his horse down a narrow trail that clung to the rock face. Elena followed, her heart in her throat, sure that one wrong step would send them both plummeting. But the trail held, and at the bottom, hidden in the shadow of the cliffs, was a camp. It wasn't what she'd expected. There were no teepees, no war drums, no circles of painted warriors. Instead, she saw sturdy brush shelters built into the canyon wall, cook fires burning low, women working hides and grinding corn. Children ran between the shelters, laughing and shouting. A few men stood near the horses, watching her arrival with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Tarek stopped in the center of the camp and turned to face her. This is my home. Elena slid off her horse, legs shaking. Every eye in the camp was on her. A woman approached, older, with silver streaking her black hair and a face carved by hard years. She looked Elena up and down, then said something sharp in a language Elena didn't understand. Tarek replied in the same language, his tone firm but respectful. The woman's expression didn't soften, but she stepped back. "That was my aunt," Tarek said. "She does not trust you. She believes you will bring trouble." "I don't want to bring trouble," Elena said quickly. "I just want to survive," Tarek finished. "I know, come." He led her to a shelter near the back of the camp, smaller than the others but well built, with a sturdy frame and a thick hide covering the entrance. Inside it was dim and cool, a relief from the sun. There was a sleeping mat, a few woven baskets, and a small fire pit. "This is yours," Tarek said. "You will sleep here. I will sleep outside unless the weather turns." Elena looked around, trying to process the fact that this, a hide-covered hole in a canyon, was now her home. Where will I eat with the women, work with the women, learn from them?" He paused. "They will not make it easy. You will have to prove yourself." "Prove what?" "That you are not a threat, that you are willing to learn, that you are stronger than you look." She met his eyes. "And if I'm not?" "Then you will fail," he said simply. "And I will take you to the mission as promised." He turned to leave, then stopped at the entrance. "There is water in the basin. Rest. Tonight, we will eat together, and I will explain what happens next." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the dim shelter with nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing. Elena sank onto the sleeping mat and buried her face in her hands. She had made a terrible mistake. Night fell fast in the desert. One moment the canyon was bathed in gold, the next it was drowning in shadow. Elena sat by the fire outside Tarek's shelter, watching the flames dance and trying not to think about how far she was from anything resembling civilization. Tarek sat across from her, silent as stone. Between them, a woman, younger than his aunt but no less severe, set down 2 wooden bowls filled with something that looked like stew. She didn't look at Elena, didn't speak, just turned and walked away. "That was Nalin," Tarek said. "My cousin. She will teach you how to live here." Elena picked up the bowl. The stew smelled strange, smoky and earthy, but her stomach was too empty to care. She took a cautious bite. It was good, better than good. Rich and filling, with chunks of meat and something that might have been wild onion. "You're surprised," Tarek observed. "I didn't expect—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding rude. "You expected savagery," he said calmly. "You expected us to eat raw meat and live like animals." Her cheeks burned. "I didn't—" "Yes, you did." He took a bite of his own stew, unbothered. "It is what you were taught. But you are here now. You will learn the truth." They ate in silence for a while. The camp around them had settled into evening rhythms. Low voices, the crackle of fires, the soft sounds of children being put to bed. Finally, Elena set down her bowl. "Why did you really bring me here?" Tarek looked at her across the flames. "I told you, to prove peace is possible." "But why me? Why not someone else? Someone who wanted this?" "Because no one wants this," he said quietly. "No white woman would choose to marry an Apache. No Apache woman would marry a settler. But you and I, we are both desperate enough to try." "That's not exactly romantic." "No," he agreed, "but it is honest." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "What happens now?" "Tomorrow, you will begin learning. Nalin will show you how to gather water, prepare food, mend clothing. You will work. If you refuse, you will not eat. That's harsh. That is survival." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Out here, there is no room for weakness. Everyone contributes, or everyone suffers. You will learn that quickly." "And you?" she asked. "What will you be doing?" "Keeping my people alive." He said it like a fact, not a boast. "There are settlers who want this land. There are soldiers who want us dead. Every day I must balance on the edge of a blade, trying to keep both sides from cutting each other apart." For the first time, Elena saw the weight he carried. It was in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he chose every word. "That's why you need me," she said slowly. "Not for love, for politics." "Yes." He didn't apologize for it. "But that does not mean I will treat you poorly. You will be safe here, Elena. I give you my word." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she hadn't just traded one kind of desperation for another, but belief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "One season," she said again, more to herself than to him. "One season," he echoed. And then he rose, banked the fire, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the stars and the weight of her choice. The days that followed were the hardest of Elena's life. Nalin woke her before dawn with a sharp shake and a string of words Elena didn't understand. She learned quickly that hesitation earned nothing but impatience. She dressed in the simple tunic and leggings Nalin had left for her. Her morning dress had been taken away, deemed impractical, and followed the other women down to the canyon stream. The water was ice cold, even in the brutal heat of summer. The women filled clay jars and carried them back to camp balanced on their heads. Elena tried to do the same and spilled half of hers before she made it 10 feet. The women didn't laugh, but their silence was worse. She learned to grind corn into meal, her hands blistering and bleeding until they hardened. She learned to scrape hides, to weave baskets, to start a fire with nothing but sticks and dry grass. Every task was a test, and every failure was noted. Tarek was rarely in camp during the day. He rode out with the men, hunting or scouting or negotiating with the scattered bands that lived deeper in the canyon. When he returned, he was covered in dust and exhaustion, and he barely spoke. But he always checked on her. "Are you hurt?" he would ask. "No," she would lie. "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Good." And that was all. No warmth, no reassurance, just the bare minimum to keep her alive. At night she lay on her mat and listened to the sounds of the camp. Voices in a language she didn't know. Laughter she wasn't part of. The howl of coyotes in the distance. She had never felt so alone. 2 weeks in, everything changed. Elena was carrying water back from the stream when she heard shouting. She looked up to see a group of riders thundering into camp, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. Tarek appeared from nowhere, striding toward them with a speed that made her pulse spike. The lead rider dismounted and spoke rapidly, gesturing toward the canyon mouth. Tarek's expression darkened. He barked orders, and the camp exploded into motion. Women grabbed children and pulled them into the shelters. Men armed themselves with rifles and bows. Nalin grabbed Elena's arm and dragged her toward the back of the canyon. "Wait, what's happening?" Elena tried to pull free, but Nalin's grip was iron. "Soldiers," Nalin said in halting English. Maybe settlers. You hide." "I'm not." "Hide." Nalin shoved her into a narrow cleft in the rock, a space barely wide enough for her body. "You stay. You quiet." And then she was gone, leaving Elena wedged in the darkness with her heart hammering and no idea what was coming. She heard hoofbeats, voices, the sharp crack of a rifle shot, then silence. It stretched on forever, thick and suffocating. Elena pressed herself deeper into the rock, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Finally, footsteps approached. She held her breath. "Elena," Tarek's voice. She nearly sobbed with relief. "It's safe. Come out." She squeezed herself free, scraped and shaking. Tarek stood in the fading light, a rifle slung over his shoulder, his face grim. "What happened?" she asked. "False alarm. Scouts mistook a hunting party for soldiers." He looked at her, and for the first time, something almost like concern crossed his face. "You're bleeding." She looked down. Her hands were torn from the rock, blood welling in thin lines across her palms. Tarek took her wrist gently and examined the wounds. "Come, we will clean these." He led her back to his shelter and brought out a small bundle of herbs and cloth. He worked in silence, cleaning the cuts with something that stung like fire, then wrapping her hands with surprising care. "You did well," he said quietly. "You did not panic." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Fear and panic are not the same." He tied off the bandage. "Fear keeps you alive. Panic kills you." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness. Not soft, not gentle, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then stood. "Rest. Tomorrow will be hard again." But as he left, Elena felt something shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. The weeks blurred together like heat shimmer on the horizon. Elena's hands stopped bleeding and started to callous. Her skin darkened under the relentless sun. She learned to move through the camp without stumbling, to anticipate Nalin's commands before they were spoken, to read the weather and the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the hawks circling overhead. She learned other things, too, that the Apache women were not cruel, just cautious, that their silence was a test, not a rejection, that respect had to be earned with sweat and consistency, not words. One morning, as Elena knelt by the grinding stone working meal for the day's bread, an older woman named Kaya sat down beside her. She didn't speak, just began grinding her own corn in steady, practiced strokes. After a long silence, she said in careful English, "You work hard." Elena looked up, startled. In 3 weeks, no one but Tarek and Nalin had spoken directly to her. "Thank you," she managed. Kaya nodded once, then returned to her work. But the next day she sat beside Elena again, and the day after that. Slowly, grudgingly, the wall began to crack. Tarek noticed. Elena could tell by the way his gaze lingered on her during the evening meals. Something almost like approval in his eyes. But he still kept his distance, still slept outside her shelter even when the nights turned cold, still spoke to her only in brief, necessary exchanges. It should have been a relief. Instead, it left her feeling strangely hollow. One evening, as the sun bled red across the canyon rim, Tarek appeared at her shelter carrying something wrapped in cloth. "Come with me," he said. She followed him up a narrow trail that climbed the canyon wall, her legs burning with the effort. At the top, the desert stretched out forever, painted gold and crimson by the dying light. Tarek sat on a flat rock and gestured for her to join him. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing 2 pieces of fry bread still warm from the fire and a handful of wild berries. "Nalin said you have been eating less," he said, handing her the food. "You must keep your strength." Elena took the bread, her throat tight. "I'm fine." "You are not fine. You are exhausted." He popped a berry into his mouth, his gaze on the horizon. "But you have not quit. That matters." They ate in silence, watching the sky deepen from gold to violet. Elena felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, just slightly. "Why did you bring me up here?" she asked finally. Tarek was quiet for a long moment. "Because you deserve to see something beautiful. You have worked hard. You have earned a moment of peace." The simplicity of it took her breath away. No ulterior motive, no political calculation, just kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been loneliness. "You are stronger than I expected," he said quietly. "When you stepped off that train, I thought you would last 3 days." "So did I," she admitted. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "You are full of surprises, Elena Hartwell. So are you, Tarek Ashwolf." They sat together until the stars came out, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Elena felt something other than fear. She felt hope. But hope, she would learn, was a dangerous thing in the desert. The trouble started 2 days later. Elena was hauling water when she heard the sound of horses approaching the canyon mouth. Not the familiar rhythm of the hunting parties returning, but something harder, faster. The entire camp froze. Women grabbed children. Men reached for weapons. Tarek emerged from his shelter, his face carved from stone. He walked to the canyon entrance alone, and Elena's heart climbed into her throat. She couldn't see what was happening from where she stood, but she could hear voices, Tarek's calm and measured, another man's loud and aggressive. The exchange went on for several tense minutes. Then Tarek returned, his jaw tight. He found Elena immediately. "Come with me, now." She set down the water jar and followed him to his shelter. Inside, he began pulling items from a leather saddlebag, a clean shirt, a length of rope, a knife. "What's happening?" Elena asked, her pulse racing. "Settlers from Sentinel. They claim we stole their cattle." "Did you?" He shot her a sharp look. "No, but that will not matter. They want an excuse for violence, and they will take any excuse they can find." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to meet with their leader and prove we had nothing to do with it." He buckled the knife to his belt. "But I need you to come with me." Elena's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because you are white. Because they will see you and know I have kept my word about the marriage. Because your presence may be the only thing that keeps them from attacking. You want to use me as a shield. Yes. He didn't apologize. Will you do it? She should have been angry. She should have refused. But she looked at his face and saw the truth. He wasn't asking because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. Yes, she said. Tarek's eyes widened fractionally, the closest thing to surprise she'd ever seen from him. You are certain? No, but I'll do it anyway. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Get your hat. We leave in 10 minutes. They rode out together, just the two of them, toward the mouth of the canyon where the settlers waited. Elena's hands shook on the reins, but she forced herself to sit straight, to look calm even though her heart was hammering. There were 5 men waiting, all armed, all sunburned and hard-eyed. Their leader was a barrel-chested man with a graying beard and a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. He looked at Tarek with undisguised contempt, then his gaze slid to Elena. Well now, he said slowly, so the rumors are true. Apache's got himself a white wife. Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. I'm Mrs. Ashwolf. The sheriff's mouth twisted. That's so. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. You hear of your own free will, ma'am? I am. Because if this savage is holding you against your will, we can take you back to town right now, get you somewhere safe. Elena felt Tarek tense beside her, but he didn't speak. This was her moment, her choice. She thought about the last 3 weeks, the backbreaking work, the cold nights, the loneliness. She thought about Kaya sitting beside her at the grinding stone, about Tarek wrapping her bleeding hands, about the way the canyon looked at sunset. I'm exactly where I choose to be, she said clearly. Now, you came here about cattle? The sheriff's eyes narrowed. We're missing 30 head, disappeared 3 nights ago. Tracks led straight toward this canyon. Then you didn't follow them far enough, Tarek said, his voice level. Because we have no cattle here. You are welcome to search the camp if you doubt my word. I don't need your permission to search anything, savage. Yes, Tarek said calmly. You do. This is treaty land. You have no jurisdiction here. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. Elena's breath stopped. However, Tarek continued, I will allow you to search as a courtesy, to prove our innocence and preserve the peace. The standoff stretched out, thick and dangerous. Finally, the sheriff jerked his head toward his men. Fine, but if we find so much as a hide, you will not, Tarek said. They rode back to camp in tense silence, the settlers trailing behind like wolves. Elena could feel the eyes of the women on her, frightened and accusing. She had brought danger into their home. The search took hours. The settlers went through every shelter, every storage pit, every corner of the camp. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But they didn't leave satisfied. They left angry, cheated of their excuse for violence. As they mounted their horses, the sheriff pointed at Tarek. This isn't over. You people are a blight on this territory, and one way or another, we'll be rid of you. Try, Tarek said softly, and you will discover why we are still here. The settlers rode off in a cloud of dust and muttered threats. The moment they were out of sight, the camp erupted in argument. Tarek's aunt shouted at him in rapid Apache, her face twisted with fury. Other voices joined in, sharp and accusing. Elena couldn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. They were angry that he'd allowed the search, angry that he'd brought outsiders into their home, angry that he'd married a white woman and given the settlers a reason to come here at all. Tarek stood silent through it all, taking the storm without flinching. When it finally died down, he spoke a single sentence in Apache. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The camp fell silent. Tarek turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid. Elena watched him go, then felt Nalin's hand on her arm. You should go to him, Nalin said quietly. I don't think he wants... Go. Elena found him at the top of the canyon, standing at the same spot where they'd shared fry bread and watched the sunset. He didn't turn when she approached. They hate me, she said. They are afraid, Tarek corrected. Fear looks like hate. What did you say to them? At the end? He was silent for a long time. I told them that if they could not trust my judgment, they were free to choose a new leader, but that I would not apologize for doing what was necessary to keep them alive. Elena moved to stand beside him, looking out over the darkening desert. You shouldn't have to fight alone. I have fought alone my entire life. That's not true anymore. He looked at her then, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of carrying an entire people on his back. You stood with me today, in front of the settlers. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Elena took a breath, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because you've kept every promise you made to me. Because you've treated me with more respect than any man I've ever known. Because those settlers were wrong, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Tarek studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. You are not what I expected, Elena Hartwell. Neither are you, Tarek Ashwolf. Something shifted in the air between them, something electric and terrifying. For a moment, Elena thought he might reach for her. For a moment, she thought she might let him, but he stepped back, putting distance between them. It is getting dark. We should return to camp. The moment shattered like glass. They walked back in silence, and Elena tried to ignore the ache in her chest that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. That night, she lay awake on her mat, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. She heard Tarek moving outside her shelter, preparing his own bedroll. She knew he was only a few feet away, separated by nothing but a thin hide covering. She thought about calling out to him. She thought about asking him to come inside, just to talk, just to not be alone. But she didn't, because she was starting to feel things she had no right to feel, things that terrified her more than the desert, more than the settlers, more than anything she'd faced since stepping off that train. She was starting to care. The cattle raids didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more ranches reported missing livestock. Each time, the tracks led toward Apache territory. Each time, Tarek had to prove his people's innocence. Each time, the settlers grew more hostile. Elena started to notice things. The way the tracks were too obvious, too easy to follow. The way they always seemed to point toward the canyon, but never actually led there. The way the raids always happened on nights when Tarek's hunting parties were miles away. Someone was framing them. Someone wanted a war. She told Tarek her suspicions one evening as they worked together repairing a torn section of shelter covering. I know, he said quietly, threading sinew through the hide. I have known since the second raid. Then why haven't you said anything? Because I have no proof. And without proof, I am simply a savage making excuses. He pulled the sinew tight, his jaw set. The settlers will not believe me. They want to believe we are guilty. So what do? We wait. We watch. And we hope the real thieves make a mistake before the settlers decide to attack. But waiting felt like drowning. Elena could see the tension building in the camp, could feel it in every suspicious glance from the women, every whispered conversation that stopped when she approached. The fragile acceptance she'd earned was crumbling. One afternoon, while Elena was washing clothes in the stream, Kaya sat down beside her. The older woman's face was troubled. You should leave, Kaya said bluntly. Elena's hand stilled in the water. What? Before it gets worse, before there is blood, you should go back to your people. These are my people now. Kaya shook her head. No, you are Tarek's wife in name, but you are not one of us. You will never be one of us. And when the settlers come, and they will come, they will kill you along with the rest of us. Is that what you want? To die for people who do not even trust you? The words hit like stones. Does Tarek know you're saying this to me? Tarek knows nothing but duty. He brought you here for politics, not love. He does not see that you have become a target instead of a shield. Kaya's voice softened slightly. I do not tell you this to be cruel. I tell you this because I see how you look at him, and I know it will only bring you pain. Elena's face burned. Do not lie to me, girl. I have eyes. Kaya stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Think about what I have said, before it is too late. She walked away, leaving Elena alone with the cold water and the weight of truth. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the hide ceiling of her shelter, Kaya's words echoing in her head. She thought about leaving, about asking Tarek to take her to the mission as he'd promised, about starting over somewhere safe. But the thought of leaving made her chest ache in ways she couldn't explain. She was still awake when she heard the shouting. Elena bolted upright, her heart racing. Outside, the camp had erupted into chaos. She scrambled out of her shelter to find people running toward the horse corral, their voices raised in alarm. The horses were gone. All of them. Tarek stood in the middle of the empty corral, his face like thunder. His brother Kai was beside him, examining the broken rails. They spoke in rapid Apache, their voices tight with fury. Elena pushed through the crowd. What happened? Rustlers, Tarek said, his voice hard. They took everything, the hunting horses, the pack animals, everything. When? Less than an hour ago. He turned to scan the canyon rim, his jaw clenched. They knew exactly when to strike. They knew our watch patterns. A cold realization settled in Elena's gut. They're trying to cripple you. No horses means you can't hunt, can't scout, can't defend yourselves. Yes. Tarek's eyes met hers. And it means we cannot prove we did not steal the settlers' cattle. We are trapped here. The crowd began shouting again, voices overlapping in anger and fear. Tarek's aunt pointed at Elena and said something harsh. Other voices joined hers. Tarek raised his hand sharply, and the noise died. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the corral. Elena couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Command, certainty, strength. The crowd didn't look happy, but they stopped arguing. When they finally dispersed, Tarek turned to his brother. Take 3 men on foot. Track them as far as you can before dawn. I need to know which direction they went. Kai nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Tarek stood alone in the empty corral, his fists clenched at his sides. Elena approached slowly. They're blaming me, she said quietly. They are afraid. That's not an answer. He turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Yes, they blame you. They blame me. They blame the settlers and the soldiers and the spirits and anyone else they can think of, because it is easier than accepting that we are being hunted and there is nothing we can do to stop it. There has to be something. There is not. His voice cracked, just slightly. I have tried everything. Diplomacy, patience, proof. None of it matters. They will keep coming until we are dead or gone, and I cannot stop them. Elena had never heard him sound defeated before. It scared her more than anything. Then we find the real thieves, she said. We get proof. We make the settlers listen. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. You're not alone in this anymore, Tarek. Let me help. He looked at her like she was something impossible, something he'd stopped believing in. Why? Why do you care what happens to us? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elena took a breath. Because you gave me a choice when I had none. Because you kept every promise. Because you're a better man than anyone I knew back home. She paused. And because I'm tired of watching you carry this alone. Tarek's hand came up slowly, hesitantly, and for a moment she thought he would touch her face. But he stopped, his fingers hovering an inch from her cheek, and then dropped his hand. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the empty corral with her heart pounding, and everything changed. The next morning, Kai returned with news. The tracks led southwest, toward a box canyon 15 miles from camp. He'd found signs of a camp there, recent fires, horse droppings, discarded whiskey bottles. Tarek called a council of the senior men and women. Elena wasn't invited, but she listened from outside the gathering circle, straining to catch what she could. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to attack the rustlers immediately. Others argued they should wait, gather more information. Tarek's voice cut through the noise, calm and strategic. He laid out a plan. A small scouting party would investigate the canyon, gather proof of who was behind the raids, and then they would take that proof to the authorities. His aunt's voice rose in protest. Elena didn't need translation to understand. She thought Tarek was naive, that the white man's law would never help them. But Tarek held firm, and in the end, his will prevailed. He emerged from the council looking drained. When he saw Elena waiting, something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. I am taking 4 men to the Box Canyon tomorrow, he said. We will find proof and end this. I'm coming with you. No. Yes. She crossed her arms. You need someone who can testify to the settlers, someone they'll actually believe. That's me. It is too dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. At least let the danger count for something. They stared at each other, locked in silent battle. Finally, Tarek's shoulders sagged. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. It was not meant as one, but there was the ghost of a smile in his eyes. Fine, but you follow my orders exactly, or I will tie you to a horse and send you back. Understood? Understood. They left at dawn, 6 riders on borrowed horses from a neighboring band. Tarek led, with Elena riding beside him. The other 4 men, including Kai, fanned out in a protective formation. The desert was brutal under the climbing sun. Elena's canteen was half empty before they'd gone 5 miles. But she didn't complain, didn't slow down. She'd earned her place on this ride, and she'd be damned if she'd prove Tarek right by faltering. By midday, they reached the mouth of the box canyon. Tarek raised his hand, and they stopped. He dismounted and studied the ground, reading tracks Elena couldn't see. 3 riders went in yesterday, he said quietly. They have not come out. Kai checked his rifle. Could be a trap. Could be. Tarek looked at Elena. Stay here with the horses. If we are not back in 1 hour, ride for camp. Like hell, Elena. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. Please. If something happens to me, these men will need you to lead them home. I need to know you are safe. The pleas undid her. She nodded reluctantly. 1 hour. Tarek and the 4 men disappeared into the canyon on foot, silent as shadows. Elena waited with the horses, her nerves wound tight as wire. Every minute felt like 10. 40 minutes passed, then 50. At 58 minutes, she heard gunfire. 3 sharp cracks, then silence. Elena's blood turned to ice. She looked at the horses, then at the canyon mouth, her mind racing. Tarek had told her to wait, told her to run if there was trouble. But she thought about him standing alone against the settlers. Thought about him wrapping her bleeding hands. Thought about the way he'd almost touched her face last night, and the way her whole world had tilted on its axis. She grabbed a rifle from one of the saddles, checked that it was loaded, and ran into the canyon. The walls rose steep on either side, channeling her forward into shadow. She moved as quietly as she could, her heart hammering. Around a bend, she found them. Tarek and his men were pinned behind a tumble of boulders, trading shots with rustlers dug in further up the canyon. Elena counted 5 hostiles, maybe 6, too many. She spotted Tarek crouched low, blood streaking down his left arm. Kai was beside him, reloading. Elena took a breath, aimed at the nearest rustler, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough. The rustler's attention swung toward her, giving Tarek's men the opening they needed. They surged forward, and the firefight became chaos, smoke and noise and the harsh crack of rifles echoing off stone. When the dust settled, 3 rustlers lay dead, 2 had surrendered, and 1 had fled on foot into the desert. Tarek strode toward Elena, his face a mask of fury. I told you to wait. You're bleeding. I told you, I heard the gunfire. I wasn't going to leave you to die. His jaw worked, anger and something else warring in his eyes. Then, without warning, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, his arms tight around her, his face buried in her hair. Do not ever do that again, he whispered, his voice shaking. Do not ever risk yourself for me. Elena's arms came up slowly, wrapping around him. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could feel the tremor in his hands. Too late, she whispered back. I already did. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes took her breath away. Then Kai's voice cut through the moment. Tarek, you need to see this. They found the proof in the rustlers' camp. Brand modification tools, bills of sale with forged signatures, and a ledger listing every ranch they'd hit. But the most damning evidence was a letter tucked into one rustler's saddlebag. Tarek read it, his expression darkening with every line. Then he handed it to Elena. It was from the sheriff and sentinel, instructions on which ranches to target, which tracks to lay, how to make it look like Apache work. Payment terms. Percentages. The law wasn't trying to stop the raids, the law was orchestrating them. They wanted a war, Tarek said softly. The whole time they were manufacturing a reason to wipe us out. Elena's hand shook as she lowered the letter. We have proof now. We can take this to the territorial governor, to the federal marshal. And who will they believe? Tarek asked. A white sheriff with 20 years of service, or a savage with a blood-stained letter and a convenient story? The hopelessness in his voice broke something in her. They'll believe me, she said. I'll testify. I'll go to every newspaper, every official, every person who'll listen. I'll make them hear the truth. Tarek looked at her like she'd offered him the sun. You would do that? Risk everything? I already have. And this time when he reached for her, he didn't stop. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, and his eyes asked a question his voice didn't. Elena answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid it might shatter. Then Tarek's other hand came up to tangle in her hair, and Elena's fingers gripped his shirt, and suddenly it was desperate and hungry, and months of restrained want pouring out all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tarek rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that, he whispered. Why not? Because I promised you freedom. I promised not to claim you. Elena's laugh was shaky but real. You're not claiming me, you idiot. I'm choosing you. His eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for hesitation, finding none. Then I choose you too, he said, if you will have me. I already said yes once, she reminded him. I'm not taking it back now. Kai cleared his throat loudly from 20 feet away. Are you two finished? Because we should leave before that last rustler comes back with friends. Tarek smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, and it transformed his whole face. Elena's heart stumbled. We are finished, Tarek called back, then quieter to Elena. For now. They rode back to camp as the sun set, carrying proof that would change everything, and hoped that maybe, just maybe, the world could be more than what they'd been told it was. But as the canyon walls rose around them and home came into view, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night, because she knew that proof and hope wouldn't be enough. The real war was just beginning. The camp erupted when they returned with the two bound rustlers and the evidence. Women and children crowded around to see the captured thieves, their faces hard with vindication. The men who doubted Tarek's strategy stood silent now, shame and relief warring in their expressions. His aunt approached with eyes that glittered with something that might have been approval, though her mouth remained tight. Tarek dismounted and immediately began organizing. He sent riders to neighboring bands with word of what they'd found. He posted extra guards around the camp perimeter. He locked the rustlers in a storage pit under armed watch. Through it all, Elena stayed close, helping where she could, translating when needed, her presence a quiet reminder that she'd earned her place here. It was near midnight when Tarek finally came to her shelter. She was sitting outside, unable to sleep, watching the stars wheel overhead. He sat down beside her without asking, close enough that their shoulders touched. You should rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow will be difficult. So should you. I cannot. My mind will not quiet. He was silent for a moment, then added, I keep thinking about what could have happened in that canyon. If you had not come when you did, but I did. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes. Elena turned to look at him. And I'd do it again. His jaw tightened. You could have been killed. So could you. That's why I came. Tarek's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers threading through hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I am not accustomed to this, to having someone who would risk themselves for me. Get accustomed to it, Elena said softly, because I'm not going anywhere. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Tomorrow I ride to Sentinel. I will present the evidence to the territorial marshal if he is there, or to the governor's representative if I must. I need you to come with me. Of course. It will be dangerous. The sheriff will know we have exposed him. He will be desperate. Elena squeezed his hand. I know, but we can't let that stop us. Tarek studied her face in the starlight. How did I find you? A woman brave enough to stand before an armed mob, foolish enough to charge into a firefight, stubborn enough to... She kissed him, cutting off the words. It was softer than the kiss in the canyon, less desperate, but somehow deeper. When they parted, she whispered, "You didn't find me. I found you, and I'm keeping you." His smile was small but real. "Then I am the luckiest man in the territory." They sat together until dawn began to pale the eastern sky, hands intertwined, preparing for the battle ahead. The ride to Sentinel took most of the morning. Tarek brought 6 men, including Kai, all heavily armed. Elena rode beside him, wearing her cleanest dress and her mother's silver comb in her hair. If they were going to face the law, she would look like the respectable woman she'd once been, not the desert survivor she'd become. The 2 captured rustlers rode between guards, hands bound, faces sullen. One of them had been talking all morning, eager to save his own skin by confirming everything in the ledger. The other stayed silent, but his fear was obvious in the way his eyes kept darting toward the horizon, as if hoping for rescue that wouldn't come. As they crested the last rise before Sentinel, Elena's stomach knotted. The town looked the same as it had 3 months ago, dusty, mean, baking under the merciless sun. But now she saw it differently. Now she knew what kind of rot festered beneath its civilized veneer. They rode in slowly, deliberately, making no effort to hide their approach. Within minutes, people began emerging from buildings to stare. A woman clutched her child close and hurried inside. 2 men stepped into the street with rifles, then thought better of it when they saw how many Apache riders there were. Tarek led them straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted. Elena slid off her horse, smoothed her skirt, and walked to stand beside him. The door to the office opened, and the sheriff stepped out, his hand resting on his gun. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes moving from Tarek to the bound rustlers to Elena. "Looks like you've been busy, savage." "We found the men who have been stealing cattle and framing my people," Tarek said evenly, "along with evidence of your involvement." The sheriff's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his fingers tighten on his gun. "That's a serious accusation." "It is also the truth." Tarek pulled the letter from his saddlebag and held it up. "Your handwriting, your seal, instructions on which ranches to target and how to make it look like Apache work." A crowd was gathering now, townspeople drawn by the commotion. Elena felt their eyes on her, heard the whispers starting. The preacher's daughter who'd married a savage, the white woman who'd chosen the wrong side. The sheriff's face hardened. "You expect me to believe you didn't forge that yourself? Everyone knows your kind are liars." "I expect you to explain it to the territorial marshal," Tarek replied calmly, "who I understand is due to arrive in Sentinel this afternoon." The sheriff went very still. "How do you know that?" "Because I sent word requesting his presence 3 days ago." Tarek's voice was quiet but carried across the street. "I knew that if we found proof, you would deny it. So I ensured there would be an impartial authority here to witness the truth." Elena felt a surge of fierce pride. He'd planned this perfectly, anticipated every move. The sheriff's hand inched toward his gun. "You son of a—" "I wouldn't." Kai's rifle came up, aimed steady at the sheriff's chest. Around them, Tarek's men did the same. The townspeople scattered, diving for cover. For a long, terrible moment, the street was frozen in tableau, guns drawn, everyone waiting for someone to make the first move. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Nobody fires a shot." A man on horseback rode into the street, wearing the badge of a territorial marshal. He was older, weathered, with the look of someone who'd seen every kind of trouble the frontier could offer. 2 deputies flanked him. "Marshal Crawford," the sheriff said, lowering his hand slowly from his gun. "Thank heaven you're here. These savages just rode into town making wild accusations." "Save it." Crawford dismounted and walked to Tarek. "I got your message. Said you had evidence of criminal conspiracy." "Let's see it." Tarek handed over the letter and the ledger. Crawford read them carefully, his expression growing darker with every line. Then he turned to the bound rustlers. "Either of you want to talk?" The talkative one nearly fell over himself to confess. He spilled everything, how the sheriff had recruited them, promised them a cut of the insurance payouts, told them exactly where to strike and how to lay false trails. His words tumbled out in a desperate rush, and the sheriff's face went from red to white to red again. Crawford listened without interrupting. When the rustler finally ran out of steam, the marshal turned to the sheriff. "You have anything to say?" "This is a setup. That letter is forged. Those men are lying to save their own necks. You can't seriously believe—" "I believe evidence," Crawford said flatly. "And I believe sworn testimony, which is more than you gave these people when you've been accusing them of theft for months." He gestured to his deputies. "Take his gun. Take his badge. He's under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and incitement to violence." The street exploded into chaos. The sheriff lunged for his gun, but the deputies were faster. They had him disarmed and in irons before he could get off a shot. He fought and cursed, shouting about savages and conspiracies and demanding a proper trial. Crawford ignored him. He turned to Tarek. "I'm going to need you and your men to stay in town long enough to give formal statements. I'll also need to interview Mrs. Ashwolf." His eyes moved to Elena. "That is you, I take it?" "Yes, sir," Elena said, stepping forward. "I witnessed everything. I'll tell you whatever you need to know." The marshal studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn dress, her sun-darkened skin, the way she stood shoulder to shoulder with Tarek without hesitation. "You married this man of your own free will?" "I did." "And you stand by that choice?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. "With everything I am." Crawford nodded slowly. "Then I'll hear your testimony, along with everyone else's." He raised his voice to address the crowd that had gathered. "People of Sentinel, I suggest you disperse and think carefully about what you've seen here today. Because if I find evidence that anyone else in this town was involved in framing innocent people for crimes they didn't commit, I'll be back with more arrests." The crowd melted away like snow in summer. Within minutes, the street was empty except for Tarek's men, the marshal, and his deputies dragging the cursing sheriff toward the jail. Crawford paused before following. "There's a hotel across the street. Get your people settled, get some food, and meet me at the courthouse in 2 hours. We have a lot to discuss." The next several hours passed in a blur of testimony, documentation, and careful legal maneuvering. Crawford was thorough and fair, listening to every witness, examining every piece of evidence. He interviewed the rustlers separately, cross-checked their stories, and questioned Elena at length about what she'd seen in the Box Canyon. She told him everything, her voice steady, her facts clear. She described the firefight, the evidence they'd found, the letter that proved the sheriff's guilt. When Crawford asked why she'd chosen to stay with the Apache instead of returning to town, she met his eyes and said simply, "Because they treated me with more honor and decency than anyone in Sentinel ever did." The marshal's expression gave nothing away, but he wrote down every word. By the time the sun began to set, Elena was exhausted. She sat in the courthouse hallway, her back against the wall, waiting for Tarek to finish his own testimony. Kai sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. "You did well today," he said without looking up. "My brother chose wisely." Elena's throat tightened. "Thank you. The women in camp will hear of this. How you stood before the marshal and spoke truth without fear. It will matter to them." "I hope so." Kai looked up then, his eyes shrewd. "You love him?" It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes." "Good. He has been alone for too long, carrying too much weight with no one to help." Kai went back to his rifle. "He is a better leader with you beside him. Do not let fear or doubt take that away." Before Elena could respond, the courthouse door opened and Tarek emerged. He looked tired but satisfied. "It is done. Crawford is filing formal charges against the sheriff and the rustlers. The territorial governor will be notified, and he is issuing a public statement clearing my people of all accusations." Elena stood, relief flooding through her. "So it's over?" Tarek's expression darkened slightly. "The legal matter is over, but the hatred that created it is not. We have won this battle, Elena. The war will take longer." Crawford appeared behind him. "Mr. Ashwolf is right. Clearing your name is one thing, changing minds is another, but you've made a good start." He handed Tarek a document. "This is a writ of protection for your people and your land. Any settler who tries to force you out or make false accusations will answer to me personally. It won't stop everyone, but it might make them think twice." "Thank you, Marshal." Tarek took the document carefully, as if it might dissolve in his hands. Crawford nodded, then turned to Elena. "Mrs. Ashwolf, I'm going to be frank with you. The road you've chosen won't be easy. There are people in this territory who will hate you for the choice you've made. You'll face prejudice, maybe violence. Are you prepared for that?" Elena thought about everything she'd survived in the past 3 months. The desert heat and backbreaking work. The fear and loneliness. The moment in that canyon when bullets had been flying and she'd run toward danger instead of away because Tarek needed her. "I'm already living it, Marshall," she said quietly, "and I'm still standing." A ghost of a smile crossed Crawford's weathered face. "I believe you are. Good luck to you both. You're going to need it." They spent that night in Sentinel's hotel, the first real beds Elena and Tarek had slept in since they'd met. But Tarek couldn't settle. He paced the small room like a caged animal, his mind clearly elsewhere. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. "Talk to me." He stopped pacing. "Crawford is right. We have legal protection now, but that will not stop the hatred. And every day we stay peaceful, we look weak. There are people in my own camp who think I should have gone to war months ago. But you didn't, because war would have destroyed your people. Yes, but now I wonder if I have simply delayed the inevitable." He sank into the chair across from her, his shoulders bowed. "I am tired, Elena. Tired of fighting, tired of justifying, tired of proving my humanity to people who will never see it." She crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "I know, and I wish I could make it stop, but you're not fighting alone anymore." "That makes it worse," his voice cracked, "because now I am not just risking my own life. I am risking yours. And if something happens to you because of me, nothing is going to happen to me. You cannot promise that." No," she admitted. "But you can't let fear of what might happen stop you from living the life you've earned. We won today, Tarek. We exposed corruption. We proved your innocence. We made the law work for us instead of against us. That's not nothing." He looked at their joined hands. "What if it is not enough? Then we keep fighting, together." Tarek pulled her up and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt the tremor in his body, the weight of months of stress and fear finally finding release. She held him back just as tightly. This man who'd given her a choice when she had none, who'd kept every promise, who'd shown her what real strength looked like. "I do not deserve you," he whispered into her hair. "Probably not," she agreed, and felt him huff a surprised laugh. "But you're stuck with me anyway." They held each other as night deepened outside, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow built something worth fighting for. The ride back to camp the next morning felt different, lighter. Tarek's men rode with their heads high, vindicated at last. The evidence they carried would change everything. No longer would the Apache be the default suspects for every crime. No longer would they have to prove their innocence over and over. But as they approached the canyon, smoke on the horizon made Elena's blood run cold. "No," Tarek breathed. Then he was spurring his horse forward, the others racing after him. They crested the rise and saw devastation. The camp was in ruins, shelters burned or collapsed, bodies lying motionless in the dust, women wailing over the dead. Children huddled together, their faces streaked with ash and tears. Tarek was off his horse before it stopped moving, running toward the carnage. Elena followed, her heart in her throat, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Nalin appeared from behind a damaged shelter, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. "Raiders," she gasped. "They came at dawn. 30 men, maybe 40. They set everything on fire and took Tarek." Lena's world tilted. "What?" "They were looking for him specifically. When they could not find him, they took your shelter apart and found—" Nalin's voice broke. "They found the box. The one he left for you. They took it and rode west." Tarek stood frozen, his face ashen. "How many dead?" 7. Another 10 wounded. Nalin's eyes filled with tears. "Your aunt fought them. They shot her. She is... Tarek, she is dying." He ran toward his aunt's shelter. Elena started to follow, but Kai caught her arm. "Let him go. This is family grief." "I'm his wife." "You are also the reason they came." The words hit like a slap. Elena stared at him. "What?" "The raiders were asking for the white woman. They said they wanted her back. They said she belonged in Sentinel, not here." Kai's expression was hard. "And when they couldn't find you, they took what they could and burned the rest." Guilt crashed over Elena in waves. All of this, the deaths, the destruction, the grief, was because of her. Kaya appeared, her face grim. "The box they took. Do you know what was in it? Elena shook her head numbly. Tarek gave it to me on our wedding night. He said to open it only when the time was right. I didn't. Then you do not know. Kaya's voice was flat. That box contained the treaty negotiations between Tarek and the territorial governor. Documents proving our legal right to this land. Letters of safe conduct. Everything we needed to prove our legitimacy. She paused. Without it, we have nothing, and whoever took it can destroy any chance we had of peace. The full horror of it settled on Elena's shoulders. Not just an attack, a calculated strike to rob the Apache of their legal standing and their future. She looked around at the burning camp, the wounded, the dead, at the women who glared at her with hate and fear, at the children who would grow up remembering this day. And she knew what she had to do. She found Tarek in his aunt's shelter, holding the old woman's hand as she struggled to breathe. His face was wet with tears, and the sight of his grief broke something in Elena's chest. But she didn't have time to comfort him, not yet. Tarek, she said quietly, I'm going after them. He looked up sharply. What? The raiders? They took the box. I'm getting it back. You are not. He stood, his voice hard. I forbid it. You can't forbid me to do anything. I'm not your property. Elena's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. They came here because of me. They destroyed your home because of me. 7 people are dead because I didn't leave when Kaya told me to, so I'm going to make it right. By getting yourself killed? By doing what needs to be done. She stepped closer. You've been fighting alone your whole life, protecting your people, sacrificing everything. Let me do the same. Let me fight for you for once. Tarek's aunt stirred, her eyes opening. She said something in Apache, her voice barely a whisper. Tarek knelt beside her, listening. She spoke again, her gaze moving to Elena. When she finished, Tarek bowed his head. The old woman touched his cheek once. Then her hand fell. Her chest stilled. Tarek closed her eyes gently, his face a mask of devastation. Then he stood and turned to Elena. She said you have more courage than sense, and that I should trust you to know your own mind. His voice was rough with grief. She said if I tried to cage you, I would lose you, and that I have already lost enough. Tears streamed down Elena's face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of this. Do not apologize for being who you are. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world coming apart. If you do this, if you go after them, you do not go alone. I am coming with you. Your people need you here. Kai can lead them. Tarek pulled back to look at her. I will not send you into danger alone. Not again. Not ever. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was needed here, that she could do this herself. But looking at his face, she saw the truth. He needed this, needed to act instead of react, to fight instead of endure. And she needed him beside her. Then we go together, she whispered. Together, he agreed. Kai organized the camp while Tarek and Elena prepared to leave. They took 2 horses, weapons, water, and enough supplies for 3 days. Nalin gave Elena a knife and showed her how to wear it, hidden in her boot. You come back, Nalin said fiercely. You hear me? You come back or I will find you in the next life and make you regret it. Elena hugged her tightly. I'll come back, I promise. As the sun began to set, Tarek and Elena rode out of the ruined camp, heading west toward an unknown enemy and a stolen future. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. But for the first time since the attack, Elena felt something other than guilt. She felt purpose. The tracks were easy to follow at first. 40 horses leave a trail even a child could read. But as night fell and the desert turned to shadow, Tarek had to rely on instinct and memory, reading the land like a book written in stone and sand. They rode in silence, both too tense for conversation. Elena's mind churned with questions. Who were the raiders? How did they know about the box? Why attack when Tarek was gone unless someone had told them he'd be in Sentinel? Someone had betrayed them. Someone had known their plans. She said as much to Tarek as they stopped to rest the horses near midnight. He nodded grimly. I have been thinking the same thing. Only a few people knew we would be gone. It had to be someone in camp or someone we told in Sentinel. The sheriff's men? Perhaps. or someone who wants the conflict to continue? Tarek's jaw tightened. There are people on both sides who profit from war. Peace is bad for business. They remounted and rode on, following the trail deeper into the wasteland. By dawn, they'd covered 20 miles. The tracks led to a narrow canyon, its entrance hidden behind a tumble of boulders. Tarek dismounted and studied the ground. They stopped here, made camp. He pointed to cold fire pits, scattered trash, the marks where horses had been picketed. They are not trying to hide. They think no one will follow. How many? Elena asked. 30, maybe 35. He looked at her. We are outnumbered 15-1. If we attack directly, we will die. Then we don't attack directly. Elena's mind was racing. We wait until dark. We sneak in, find the box, and get out before they know we're there. And if we are caught? She met his eyes. Then we fight, and we don't stop fighting until we're free or we're dead. Tarek studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We rest until sunset. Then we move. They found a sheltered spot in the rocks and tried to sleep, taking turns keeping watch. But every time Elena closed her eyes, she saw the burning camp, the dead. Tarek's aunt's face as the life left her. This had to work. It had to. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood, Tarek and Elena prepared for the most dangerous night of their lives. They checked their weapons, filled their canteens, said nothing because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been spoken in the space between heartbeats and shared glances. When full dark fell, they moved. The canyon was a maze of shadow and stone, every sound amplified in the narrow confines. Elena's heart hammered so loud she was certain the raiders would hear it echoing off the walls. She moved behind Tarek, stepping where he stepped, breathing when he breathed, trusting him to navigate the darkness while she fought to control the terror crawling up her spine. They'd left the horses a mile back, hidden in a draw where they wouldn't give away their position. Now they were on foot, armed with nothing but knives, a rifle they couldn't risk firing, and desperation sharp enough to cut. Tarek held up his hand, and Elena froze. Ahead, firelight flickered against the canyon wall. Voices drifted on the night air, rough and careless. The raiders were drinking, celebrating their successful attack. The sound of their laughter made Elena's blood boil. Tarek pointed to a ledge above the camp, then to himself. He would circle around, get the high ground, cover her approach. Elena nodded understanding. She would go in low, find the box, signal him when she had it. It was a terrible plan. They both knew it, but it was the only plan they had. Tarek's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once, then let go. He disappeared into the shadows like smoke, leaving her alone. Elena counted to 100, giving him time to get into position. Then she began moving forward, staying close to the canyon wall where the darkness was deepest. She could see the camp now, bedrolls scattered around 3 fires, horses picketed beyond, and in the center, a pile of plunder taken from the Apache camp. She scanned the pile from her hiding place, searching for the carved wooden box Tarek had given her. It had been beautiful once, inlaid with turquoise and silver. She'd kept it in her shelter, unopened, waiting for the right moment. Now that moment would never come. A guard walked past her position, so close she could smell tobacco and whiskey on him. She pressed herself against the stone, barely breathing. He paused, and for one terrible second she thought he'd spotted her. Then he spat, adjusted his gun belt, and moved on. Elena waited until he was 20 feet away, then slipped forward to the next patch of shadow. The pile of plunder was 15 feet ahead. She could see blankets, baskets, weapons, but no box. Fear spiked through her. What if they'd already destroyed it? What if the documents were gone? Then she saw it, tucked under a saddle near the largest fire, the carved wood catching the light. Relief flooded through her so suddenly her knees went weak. She studied the camp, counting men. 12 around the fires, 3 more on watch at the canyon entrance, others sleeping in bedrolls. At least 20, maybe more. All of them between her and the box. This was insane. She should signal Tarek to abort, retreat, come up with a better plan. But there was no better plan, and no time. Elena pulled the knife from her boot and began moving forward. She made it 5 feet before everything went wrong. A man stumbled out from behind a boulder directly in her path, fumbling with his pants. He looked up, saw her, and his eyes went wide. "Hey, we got an..." Elena moved on instinct, driving the knife up under his ribs the way Nailin had shown her. The man's shout died in a gurgle, and he collapsed. But the damage was done. Men were already moving, reaching for weapons, shouting questions. "Contact! We got contact!" Elena ran for the box, knowing she'd never make it, knowing this was how she died, but unable to stop. She grabbed the carved wood, clutched it to her chest, and spun toward the canyon wall. A rifle cracked and stone exploded beside her head. She ducked, stumbled, kept running. Then Tarek was there, materializing from the darkness with his rifle raised. He fired once, twice, and 2 raiders went down. "Move!" he shouted. Elena ran toward him as the camp erupted into chaos. Men scattered for cover, some returning fire blindly into the darkness. Tarek grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a boulder as bullets whined past. "Did you get it?" he demanded. She held up the box, and his eyes blazed with fierce pride. "Then we run, now!" They fled into the canyon, bullets chasing them, men shouting behind them. The darkness was both enemy and ally. It hid them, but it also made every step treacherous. Elena's boot caught on a rock, and she went down hard, the box flying from her hands. "No!" She scrambled after it on hands and knees, her fingers closing on wood just as a raider rounded the bend behind them. Tarek shot him without hesitation. "Elena, move!" She grabbed the box and ran, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The raiders were mounted now, using torches to light their way, closing the distance. Tarek pulled Elena into a narrow cleft in the rock, pressing her back against stone. They could hear horses thundering past, men cursing, searching. Tarek's hand covered her mouth, muffling her ragged breathing. They stood frozen for an eternity while the search went on around them. Finally, the sounds began to fade. The raiders were spreading out, searching farther up the canyon. Tarek lowered his hand. "Can you keep going?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then we head for the horses. Stay low. Stay quiet. If we can reach them before the raiders figure out we doubled back." A voice cut through the darkness. "I know you're here, Ash Wolf. I can smell that white woman of yours." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. She'd heard it in Sentinel, loud and aggressive and full of hate, one of the sheriff's deputies. "We got 30 men out here," the voice continued, "and you got nowhere to run. So how about you save us all some time? Give us the woman and the box, and we'll let you walk away. You got my word on that." Tarek's jaw clenched. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "Your word means nothing. The sheriff is in chains. Your conspiracy is exposed. This is over." Harsh laughter echoed off the canyon walls. "Over? Boy, it's just getting started. You think the marshal can protect you? You think one crooked sheriff in jail changes anything?" The voice moved closer, and Elena saw torchlight flickering. "There's 100 men like him, 1,000. This whole territory wants you people gone, and nothing's going to stop that. Not the law, not your treaty papers, not your pretty white wife." "Then you'll have to kill us both," Tarek called back, "because we're not giving you anything." "Well, see, that's what I figured you'd say." The deputy's voice turned casual, conversational. "So I brought some insurance." He stepped into view, torch held high. And beside him, hands bound and face bloody, was Kai. Elena's stomach dropped. "Found him heading towards Sentinel," the deputy said. "Figured you might want him back. So here's the deal. You give us the box and the woman, we give you your brother. Everybody walks away alive." Tarek went rigid beside her. His breathing changed, becoming shallow and controlled. Elena knew that reaction. She'd seen it in the canyon when the rustlers had him pinned. It meant he was calculating odds, considering options, preparing to do something desperate. "Don't," she whispered. "It's a trap. Even if we give them what they want, they'll kill us all." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "But I cannot let Kai die, and I can't let you trade yourself for him." Elena's hand closed on his arm. "There has to be another way." "There is not." "Tarek, please!" "Clock's ticking, Ash Wolf," the deputy shouted. "You got 10 seconds to decide, or I put a bullet in his head." Elena looked at the box in her hands. The carved wood, the inlaid turquoise. Tarek had told her to open it only when the time was right. The time was right. She turned away from Tarek, using her body to shield what she was doing. Her fingers found the hidden catch. Tarek had shown her where it was weeks ago, an offhand comment she'd barely registered. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in silk, were the treaty documents, but beneath them was something else, a length of red cloth, folded carefully, and a letter, written in Tarek's careful hand. Elena unfolded the letter with shaking fingers, angling it to catch the distant torchlight. The words swam before her eyes, but she forced herself to focus. Elena, if you're reading this, I am either dead or captured, and you are alone. Do not grieve. Do not blame yourself. Know that every moment with you was a gift I never expected to receive. The cloth in this box is a war sash. It belonged to my father and his father before him. It is worn by those who ride into battle knowing they may not return. I give it to you not as a burden, but as a choice. You are free, Elena. You were always free. The marriage, the treaty, the politics. None of it bound you. You owed me nothing. You owe me nothing still. But if you choose, freely, fully, with no debt or obligation, to stand with me and my people, then wear this sash. Ride with us. Fight with us. Not as my wife by contract, but as my partner by choice. The decision is yours. It was always yours. Whatever you choose, know that you changed everything. You gave me hope when I had none. You taught me that bridges can be built between worlds that hatred tried to keep apart. You're the bravest person I have ever known. Live well. Live free. Yours. If you'll have me. Tarek tears blurred Elena's vision. She looked at the red sash, then at Tarek beside her, then at Kai, bloodied and bound in the torchlight. The deputy was counting down. 5, 4. Elena made her decision. She tucked the documents into her dress, then pulled out the red sash and tied it around her waist. The silk was soft and strong, the weight of it somehow grounding. Tarek saw what she was doing and went very still. Elena, no. You told me to open it when the time was right. She met his eyes. The time is right. That sash means you intend to fight, to the death if necessary. I know what it means. She checked her knife, then picked up a fallen raider's rifle. I'm not letting them take you or your brother. I'm not letting them destroy everything we've built. And I'm sure as hell not giving them these documents. 2! The deputy shouted. 1! Elena stood up and stepped out of the cleft. 30 guns swung toward her. She raised her voice, letting it carry across the canyon. You want the box? Come and get it. Then she threw it, not toward the raiders, but toward the canyon wall. It arced through the air and shattered against stone, documents scattering like snow. The deputy lunged for them, and in that moment of distraction, Elena raised the rifle and fired. The shot went wide. She wasn't practiced enough to make it count, but it didn't matter, because Tarek was moving, using the chaos to close the distance. He tackled the deputy, driving him into the dirt. Kai twisted free of his bonds and grabbed the deputy's gun. And then it was war. The canyon exploded with gunfire and screaming. Elena fired until her rifle was empty, then drew her knife and ran forward. A raider came at her, and she ducked under his swing, drove the blade into his side, pulled it free, and kept moving. She reached Kai just as 3 men surrounded him. She jumped on one from behind, her knife finding his throat. Warm blood sprayed across her hands and face, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Kai dispatched another raider with brutal efficiency, then grabbed Elena's arm. Where's Tarek? I don't... She spun, searching frantically through the chaos. There. Tarek was fighting hand-to-hand with the deputy, both of them bloodied and desperate. The deputy had size and strength. Tarek had speed and fury. They crashed into this canyon wall, grappling for the deputy's gun. Elena started toward them, but Kai held her back. Wait. He needs help. He needs you to trust him. The gun went off. Both men staggered apart. For one terrible heartbeat, Elena couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then the deputy collapsed, and Tarek stood over him, chest heaving, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Elena ran to him, crashing into him hard enough to knock him back a step. He caught her, held her, his hand coming up to tangle in her hair. You wore the sash, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I chose you, she said. I choose you. Now and always. Around them, the remaining raiders were fleeing. Kai and 2 Apache riders who'd apparently followed them had the survivors pinned down. The battle was over, but the cost was written in blood on the canyon floor. Elena pulled back to look at Tarek. You're hurt. So are you. His thumb brushed her cheek, came away red. Whose blood is this? I don't know. She was shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. I killed people. You survived. Tarek's hands framed her face, forcing her to focus on him. You fought. You protected what mattered. That is all. The documents, I threw the box. Kai has them. He nodded toward his brother, who was gathering scattered papers from where they'd fallen. You gave us the distraction we needed. You saved us. Elena's legs gave out. Tarek caught her, lowered them both to the ground. She sat in the dirt with her back against the canyon wall, covered in blood and dust and wearing a war sash she'd earned with steel and courage. Kai approached, holding the recovered documents. They were torn and dirty, but intact. We need to move. More raiders may come. Can you ride? Tarek asked Elena. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They collected their horses and the treaty papers and rode out of that canyon as dawn began to break. Behind them, they left the dead and the dying, and Elena tried not to think about the fact that some of that blood was on her hands. She'd killed to protect what she loved, and she'd do it again if she had to. That truth should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into her bones like certainty. They rode hard for 2 days, stopping only when the horses were near collapse. Kai had sent riders ahead to warn the camp they were coming, to tell them the documents were safe and the raiders were broken. On the second night, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Tarek finally spoke about what had happened. You should not have revealed yourself, he said quietly. You could have stayed hidden. Let me trade myself for Kai. And then what? Elena was cleaning the rifle, her movements mechanical. You'd be dead or captured. Kai would blame himself. Your people would lose their leader, all for nothing. It would not have been for nothing. You would have been safe. She set down the rifle and looked at him. I don't want to be safe if it means losing you. I thought I made that clear when I rode into a firefight and put on your father's war sash. Tarek's expression was complicated, pride and fear and something that might have been awe. That sash has been worn by warriors for 3 generations. Men who rode into battles they knew they could not win, who chose honor over survival. Then I wore it appropriately. Elena. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Do you understand what you have done? You fought beside me. You killed to protect my brother. You scattered sacred documents to create a distraction. The women in camp, when they hear this, they will never question you again. You have earned your place in ways no white woman ever has. I didn't do it to earn anything. I did it because I love you. The words came out raw and honest. I did it because you and Kai and everyone in that camp are my family now. And I will fight for my family. Tarek pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tremor in his hands. I do not know what I did to deserve you. You gave me a choice when everyone else tried to take them away. You treated me like I mattered. You saw me. She pulled back to meet his eyes. That's all I ever wanted, to be seen. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, tasting like dust and blood and survival. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. When we return to camp, he said quietly, I want to marry you again, not for politics or peace or strategy, just because I love you and I want everyone to know it. Elena's throat tightened. We're already married. That was a contract. This would be a choice. Then yes. She smiled through tears. 1,000 times yes. They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. 2 people who'd been forged in fire and come out stronger than steel. They arrived at the canyon the next afternoon to find it transformed. The burned shelters had been rebuilt. The wounded were recovering, and the entire camp turned out to greet them, faces that had been hostile now showing something close to respect. Nalin was the first to reach them. She looked at Elena's blood-stained clothes and the red sash tied around her waist, and her eyes went wide. You wore the war sash. I did. And you fought? She killed 3 men, Kai said, dismounting. Saved my life, recovered the documents. His voice carried across the gathering crowd. She rode into an enemy camp outnumbered 30-1 and came out victorious. The crowd murmured, eyes moving from the sash to Elena's face. Kaya stepped forward, the woman who'd told Elena to leave before it was too late. She studied Elena for a long moment, then did something Elena never expected. She knelt. "You have proven yourself," Kaya said in careful English. "You are one of us. Welcome home, sister." One by one, the other women knelt. Then the men, until the entire camp was on their knees before her, and Elena stood there in her blood-stained dress and war sash, too overwhelmed to speak. Tarek's hand found hers. "They honor you," he said quietly. "Accept it with grace." Elena's voice shook when she finally spoke. "I don't deserve this." "Yes," Tarek said simply. "You do." That night they held council. Tarek presented the recovered documents to the elders, explained what had happened in Sentinel and the Box Canyon. Marshal Crawford had sent a letter with additional riders, confirming the sheriff's arrest and promising federal protection for the camp. The mood was cautiously optimistic. They'd won battles, legal and physical. The documents were safe. The conspiracy was exposed. But everyone knew the war was far from over. "The raiders will regroup," one elder said. "They will come again." "Let them," Kai replied. "We know their tactics now. We are ready." "And we are not alone," Tarek added, his hand finding Elena's. "We have allies now, people who will stand with us. That changes everything." The council voted to send a delegation to the territorial capital to present their case directly to the governor. Tarek would lead it with Elena and Kai at his side. It was risky, leaving the camp vulnerable, walking into the heart of settler government. But it was also necessary, because peace couldn't be won with guns alone. Sometimes you had to fight with words and witnesses and the stubborn refusal to be erased. As the council dispersed, Tarek pulled Elena aside. "There is something I need to show you." He led her to a newly rebuilt shelter at the edge of camp. Inside, it was simple but beautiful. Woven mats on the floor, a sleeping platform covered in soft furs, a small fire pit with cooking stones arranged just so. "Nalin and the other women built it," Tarek said, "while we were gone. For us. For our future." Elena's eyes stung. "It's perfect." "Not yet." He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I have carried this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He unwrapped it to reveal a silver ring, delicate and beautiful, set with a single piece of turquoise. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I have left of her. I want you to wear it. Not because our marriage contract says you should, but because you choose to." Elena held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I choose you," she whispered. "Every day. For the rest of my life. And I choose you." He pulled her close. "My wife, my partner, my home." They stood together in their new shelter as night fell and the camp settled into peaceful rhythms around them. Outside, children played and women sang and men told stories by the fire. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight and refused to let go. The journey to the capital would be dangerous. The fight for recognition and rights would be long. The hatred and prejudice wouldn't disappear just because they'd won a few battles. But standing there in Tarek's arms, wearing his mother's ring and his father's sash, Elena felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. She felt like she'd come home, and she'd fight with everything she had to protect it. The delegation left at dawn 3 days later, 12 riders strong with Tarek at the lead and Elena beside him. Kai rode flanking position with 4 warriors, while 2 elders and 3 younger men carried the precious documents in sealed leather cases. The territorial capital lay 2 weeks' ride to the east through land that grew more settled and more hostile with every mile. Elena wore a dress Nalin had made for her, simple but dignified, the kind of thing a frontier woman might wear to church or town meetings. But beneath it, tucked against her skin, was the red war sash, a reminder of what she'd survived, what she was willing to do again if necessary. They rode through Apache territory for 3 days without incident, camping in canyons where Tarek's people had allies. But on the 4th day, they crossed into settler land, and the weight of watching eyes became oppressive. Farmers stopped their plowing to stare. Women pulled children inside when they passed. Men gathered in doorways with rifles visible. At every town, Tarek sent a rider ahead to announce their peaceful intentions. At every town, they were met with suspicion at best, open hostility at worst. One settlement refused to let them purchase supplies. Another charged them triple the normal prices. In a third, someone threw a rock at Elena and called her a traitor to her race. Tarek caught the rock before it hit her, his reflexes lightning quick. He held it for a moment, looking at the man who'd thrown it, then dropped it in the dust and rode on without a word. That night, Elena found him sitting alone by their fire, staring into the flames. "You should have said something," she said, settling beside him. "Back in that town. What would I say that would change his mind?" Tarek's voice was tired. "He has decided what I am. Words will not alter that." "Then why are we doing this? Why ride to the capital if words won't change anything?" "Because they might change some things. For some people." He looked at her. "And because if we do not try, we accept that the world will never be different than it is now. I cannot accept that. Not after everything we have fought for." Elena took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "When we get to the capital, they're going to say terrible things. About you, about me, about our marriage." "I know." "And you're still willing to stand in front of them and argue for peace? What choice do I have?" Tarek turned his hand over, studying her palm as if reading her future in the lines. "My people are dying. Every year there are fewer of us. The land we were promised shrinks. The buffalo disappear. If I do not fight for a different future now, there will be no future left to fight for." The weight of it settled on Elena's shoulders, the impossible burden he carried, the knowledge that one wrong move could destroy his people's last chance. "I wish I could make it easier." "You do, every day." He kissed her palm, then folded her fingers closed around the kiss. "When I stand before the governor, I will not be alone. That matters more than you know." They reached the capital on a scorching afternoon 2 weeks after leaving camp. The city was bigger than anything Elena had seen since Missouri. Brick buildings 3 stories tall, paved streets, gas lamps, a train station with actual schedules posted. The noise and crowds and smell of too many people in too small a space made her dizzy. Marshal Crawford met them at the edge of town, his face grim. "You made it. Wasn't sure you would." "We had motivation," Tarek said, dismounting. "Is the governor willing to meet?" "He'll meet. But you should know the Cattlemen's Association has been lobbying hard against you. They've convinced half the territorial legislature that giving you legal recognition sets a dangerous precedent." Crawford's eyes moved to Elena. "And they're making hay about your marriage, calling it an abomination, saying it proves you can't be trusted to lead your people." Elena's jaw tightened. "Let them say what they want. The truth is documented." "Documentation won't matter if the governor decides politics is more important than justice." Crawford pulled out a folded paper. "This came for you yesterday. Telegram from Washington." Tarek took it, read it, and went very still. Then he handed it to Elena. It was from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They'd reviewed the treaty documents, copies Crawford had sent ahead, and found them legally sound. More importantly, they'd discovered that the original treaty had never been properly ratified, which meant the land grants were in violation of federal law. The Apache had the legal high ground. If the governor refused to honor their rights, the federal government could intervene. "This changes everything," Elena breathed. "Maybe." Crawford didn't look convinced. "Or maybe it just makes the governor dig in harder. Men don't like being told they're wrong, especially by Washington bureaucrats." "Then we make sure he understands the alternative is worse," Tarek said quietly. "We make him see that peace is not just moral, it is practical." The meeting was scheduled for the next morning in the governor's mansion, a sprawling white building that made Elena think of the plantation houses back east. They were led to a waiting room filled with uncomfortable chairs and judgmental portraits of stern-faced men. Kai sat rigid beside Tarek, his hand never far from his knife. The elders maintained stoic expressions, but Elena could see the tension in their shoulders. They were warriors and leaders, but this kind of battle, one fought with words and suits and ties, was foreign territory. A clerk appeared. "The governor will see you now." They filed into an office that reeked of cigar smoke and old money. Governor Wallace sat behind a massive desk, flanked by 3 men in expensive suits, the Cattlemen's Association representatives, Elena guessed. Behind them stood 2 army officers, their uniforms pressed and medals gleaming. Wallace himself was younger than Elena expected, maybe 40, with the calculating eyes of a career politician. He looked at Tarek without rising, without offering his hand. Mr. Ashwolf, I understand you have concerns about the land treaty. It was a deliberate insult, reducing their cause to mere concerns. Elena felt Tarek tense beside her. Governor Wallace, Tarek said, his voice even, I am here to discuss the legal status of my people's land rights and the ongoing violence against us. Yes, well, violence is a two-way street, isn't it? One of the cattlemen spoke up. Your people have been stealing livestock for months. That accusation was investigated and disproven, Elena interjected. Marshal Crawford has the evidence. The real thieves were settlers working with your former sheriff. The cattleman's eyes narrowed. And you are? Elena Ashwolf, Tarek's wife. The white woman who married a savage. His lip curled. Tell me, Mrs. Ashwolf, are you here of your own free will, or has this man coerced you? The room went very quiet. Elena felt every eye on her, weighing her answer. She thought about the train platform in Sentinel, the burning camp, the Box Canyon firefight, the war sash tied beneath her dress. I'm here because I choose to be, she said clearly, just as I chose to marry Tarek. Just as I chose to fight beside him when raiders attacked our home. Just as I choose now to stand witness to the truth, that his people have been systematically targeted, their rights violated, and their lives endangered by men who profit from conflict. Convenient testimony from a woman who's clearly been influenced. Influenced by what? Honesty? Courage? Basic human decency? Elena's voice sharpened. I've seen more honor in Tarek's camp than I ever saw in so-called civilized society. So yes, I'm biased toward justice. The governor held up his hand. That's enough. Mrs. Ashwolf, your passion is noted. But this meeting is about facts, not feelings. Tarek stepped forward and placed the leather case on the governor's desk. Then let us discuss facts. The treaty signed in 1867 granted my people 12,000 acres. Over the past 7 years, settlers have encroached on 9,000 of those acres. We have been pushed into smaller and smaller territory despite legal protections. The treaty was never properly ratified, one of the Army officers said, which makes it questionable. The Bureau of Indian Affairs disagrees. Tarek pulled out the telegram. They have confirmed the treaty's validity and noted that the encroachment violates federal law. If this matter is not resolved at the territorial level, it will be escalated to Washington. Governor Wallace's expression darkened. He took the telegram, read it, and set it down with deliberate care. I see. And if I were to resolve this matter in your favor, what assurances can you give that there will be no further violence? The same assurance you give us, Tarek replied, that the law will be enforced fairly, that crimes against my people will be investigated and punished, that our rights will be respected. Your people are not American citizens. You have no rights. The words hung in the air like poison. Tarek's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Then make us citizens. Give us the same protection settlers have. Allow us to participate in the society you claim to be building. That's preposterous, the cattleman sputtered. You can't just give savages citizenship. Why not? Elena demanded. We give it to immigrants from every country in Europe. We give it to men who can barely speak English. Why not to people who've lived on this land for generations? Because they're not civilized. I've lived with them for 4 months, Elena shot back. I've seen their laws, their customs, their values. They're more civilized than half the settlers I've met. They don't cheat or lie or murder for profit. They honor their word. They take care of their elderly and their children. They've built a community based on mutual respect and survival. If that's not civilization, I don't know what is. The governor studied her for a long moment. You've caused quite a stir, Mrs. Ashwolf. The newspapers are full of your story. The white woman who chose the Apache over her own people. I chose truth over lies, love over hate. That shouldn't be controversial. And yet it is. Wallace leaned back in his chair. Which brings me to a proposal. The territorial legislature is prepared to recognize your treaty rights, with conditions. Tarek's eyes narrowed. What conditions? First, you must agree to prevent any Apache raids on settler property. Any theft, any violence, and the treaty is void. We have never raided settler property. We have been the victims, not the aggressors. Nevertheless, you will be held accountable for the actions of all Apache in the territory. It was an impossible standard, holding Tarek responsible for bands he had no authority over. But Elena could see him calculating, weighing whether it was worth accepting. Second, Wallace continued, you will allow federal surveyors to mark your boundaries clearly, and you will accept a U.S. Army presence on your land to maintain order. Army occupation, Kai said flatly. You want us to invite our enemies into our homes. I want to ensure peace, the governor corrected. The Army presence would protect you as much as the settlers. The Army has killed more of my people than settlers ever have, Tarek said quietly. You ask us to trust the men who massacred our families. I ask you to make difficult compromises for the sake of survival. Wallace's voice hardened. Because the alternative is that I declare your treaty invalid and open your land to settlement. You'll have nothing. No legal standing, no protection, no future. The threat was clear. Comply or be destroyed. Elena watched Tarek struggle with it, saw the war in his eyes. He'd come here hoping for justice and been offered subjugation dressed up as compromise. The elders behind them began murmuring in Apache. Kai's hand gripped his knife hilt. The tension in the room spiraled toward violence. Then Elena did something that surprised even herself. She stepped forward and addressed the governor directly. What if we offered you something better? Wallace raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You're worried about raids and violence, about maintaining order in the territory, about proving to Washington that you can govern effectively. Elena's mind raced, pulling together threads of an idea. What if Tarek's people became your partners in that effort instead of your problem? Explain. The Apache know this land better than any surveyor or soldier ever will. They know the water sources, the game trails, the hiding places outlaws use. They can track anyone, anywhere. She looked at Tarek, willing him to trust her. What if they worked with the territorial government, helped track criminals, prevented actual raids, served as guides and scouts? You want me to hire savages as law enforcement? The cattleman looked apoplectic. I want you to utilize a resource you're currently wasting, Elena countered. Tarek just proved that he's better at solving crimes than your sheriff was. He tracked down the real cattle thieves when your own law couldn't. Imagine what he and his people could do with official backing. Governor Wallace steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. In exchange for full recognition of treaty rights, no army occupation, citizenship for those who want it, and fair payment for services rendered. Elena's voice strengthened. You get expertise, peace, and the ability to tell Washington you've created a model for Apache settler cooperation. We get legal standing and the right to live on our land without constant threat of erasure. The room erupted in argument. The cattlemen objected. The army officers protested. The governor's advisors whispered urgently in his ear. Through it all, Tarek stood silent, his eyes on Elena. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he was angry she'd spoken for him or grateful she'd found a potential path forward. Finally, Wallace raised his hand for silence. It's an interesting proposal, Mrs. Ashwolf. Highly irregular, but interesting. He looked at Tarek. What do you say? Would your people be willing to work with territorial law enforcement? Tarek's voice was carefully neutral. I would need to discuss it with my council. This is not a decision I can make alone. Of course. Wallace stood, signaling the meeting was ending. You have 1 week. Discuss with your people. If they agree to the partnership arrangement, I'll put the treaty recognition before the legislature. If not, he let the threat hang unsaid. They were escorted out of the mansion in tense silence. Only when they were back on the street, safely away from listening ears, did Kai explode. Work with them? After everything they have done to us? Elena, what were you thinking? I was thinking we needed leverage, Elena said quietly. The governor was never going to give us what we wanted out of fairness, so I gave him something he actually wants, a solution that makes him look good. At the cost of our dignity, one of the elders said harshly. We do not serve the white man's law. You're already subject to it, Elena pointed out. This way, you'd have some control over how it's enforced. She has a point, Tarek said slowly. Everyone turned to look at him. We can fight and lose everything, or we can adapt and survive. Our ancestors adapted when the Spanish came, when the Mexicans came. Adaptation is not surrender, it is strategy. You are seriously considering this? Kai looked betrayed. I am considering survival. Which is my duty as leader? Tarek's voice was firm. We will return to camp. We will call council. We will vote. And whatever the people decide, I will honor. The ride back to camp took 2 weeks, and every mile was filled with argument. The elders were divided. The warriors were suspicious. Even Kai, usually Tarek's staunchest supporter, wavered between pragmatism and pride. Elena stayed quiet, wondering if she'd made everything worse. She'd spoken without consulting Tarek, had proposed a compromise that might destroy his leadership if the people rejected it. On the last night before they reached home, Tarek came to her tent. I need to know why, he said without preamble. Why you spoke up in that meeting. Why you offered that solution without asking me first. Elena set down the shirt she'd been mending. Because I saw you trapped. They gave you an impossible choice. Accept subjugation or lose everything. I was trying to find a third option. By offering my people as servants to the government. By offering them as partners, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Not to everyone. Tarek sat down heavily. Half the council will see it as collaboration with the enemy. The other half will see it as practical necessity. And I will be caught in the middle, trying to hold everyone together while they tear each other apart over this decision. Then don't decide, Elena said. Let the people choose, really choose, not just vote the way you tell them to. And if they choose wrong, if they reject the compromise and we lose the treaty, then at least they'll own that choice. At least you won't have to carry it alone. Tarek looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. How did you become so wise? I married a man who taught me that survival sometimes means doing hard things you never thought you'd have to do. The council meeting lasted 3 days. Every adult in camp had a voice, and they used them. Arguments raged from dawn until long past midnight. Voices were raised, insults were hurled, old grievances were dredged up. Elena watched from the edges, not participating. This was not her decision to make. She saw Nalin argue passionately for acceptance, saw Kai gradually shift from opposition to reluctant support, saw the elders struggle with tradition versus necessity. On the 3rd day, Tarek called for a vote. The result was close, too close. 53 in favor, 48 against. Enough to accept the governor's terms, but not enough to avoid bitter division. Tarek stood before his people, his face grave. The vote is decided, we will accept the partnership. But I make this vow, any agreement we sign will include protections. We will not be made servants. We will be hired as equals, paid fairly, and treated with respect. If those terms are not met, we walk away and take our chances with the federal government. And if the governor refuses those terms, someone called out, then we have lost nothing we didn't already risk losing. Tarek's voice carried across the gathering. But we will know we tried every path to peace before accepting war. The camp dispersed slowly, people retreating to their shelters with the weight of the decision pressing on their shoulders. Elena found Tarek standing alone at the canyon edge, looking out over the desert. It's done, she said softly. Yes, and now we see if it was the right choice. There's no such thing as a right choice, just the best option available at the time. He turned to her, and she saw the exhaustion in his face. I am so tired, Elena. Tired of fighting, tired of negotiating, tired of carrying the weight of my people's future on every decision I make. I know, she took his hand, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. They stood together as the sun set and the stars emerged, 2 people facing an uncertain future but facing it together. The next week, Tarek rode back to the capital with a formal response. Elena went with him, along with Kai and Marshal Crawford, who'd agreed to help negotiate the specific terms. The final agreement took 4 days to hammer out. For every concession the governor demanded, Tarek demanded 1 in return. When Wallace wanted unlimited access to Apache scouts, Tarek insisted on caps and rotation schedules. When the legislature tried to reduce the payment, Crawford produced evidence of what the Army paid its civilian scouts and demanded parity. Through it all, Elena sat beside Tarek, silent but present, a reminder that he had witnesses, that his words would be documented, that attempts to cheat or manipulate would be exposed. Finally, On a hot afternoon in late September, the papers were signed. The Apache would receive full recognition of their treaty lands, all 12,000 acres, with clearly marked boundaries and legal protections against encroachment. In exchange, they would provide tracking and scouting services to the territorial government at fair market rates. Those who wished could apply for citizenship. The Army would maintain a small liaison office on Apache land, but would not occupy or patrol it. It wasn't perfect, but it was survival. Governor Wallace shook Tarek's hand for the newspaper photographers, his smile political and false. "Congratulations, Mr. Ashwolf. You've achieved something remarkable." "We will see if it lasts," Tarek replied. "So will the whole territory." Wallace's smile tightened. "You've bet everything on this working. I hope you're right." "So do I, Governor. So do I." They rode back to camp as autumn began turning the cottonwoods gold. Word of the agreement had spread, and as they approached the canyon, Elena saw something she'd never expected. A crowd. Not just Apache, but settlers too. Farmers and merchants and even a few ranchers drawn by curiosity or hope or the simple desire to witness history being made. Tarek reined in his horse, uncertain. Kai's hand moved to his rifle. Then Marshal Crawford rode forward. "Easy. They're not here for trouble. They're here to see if peace is actually possible." A woman stepped out of the crowd, the owner of Sentinel's General Store. Elena recognized her from months ago, when she'd first arrived. The woman had sold her supplies at triple the price. "Mr. Ashwolf," the woman said, her voice carrying, "I want to apologize for the prices I charged, for the way I treated you. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Tarek looked stunned. Thank you." A rancher spoke up next. "Some of us want to talk about hiring Apache scouts to track down the rustlers who've been hitting our spreads. Proper payment, proper respect. If you're interested." More voices joined in. A request to trade for Apache tanned leather. An invitation to a town meeting to discuss water rights. An offer to share information about outlaw movements. Not everyone was friendly. Some faces in the crowd were still hard with hatred. Some muttered insults just loud enough to be heard. But enough had changed. Enough were willing to try. Tarek looked at Elena, and she saw hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in months. "We will talk," he said to the crowd. "Tomorrow, at the canyon mouth. Bring your proposals, and we will discuss them in good faith." The crowd dispersed slowly. As they rode into camp, the Apache people emerged to greet them. Children ran alongside the horses. Women called out questions. Men waited with crossed arms but open expressions. Nalin appeared, smiling wide. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Tarek corrected, looking at Elena. "All of us together." That night they held a feast. The last of the stored meat was roasted, and wild onions and roots were gathered. Someone produced a hidden store of honey. Children played while adults talked and laughed and allowed themselves, for one night, to believe in the future. Elena sat beside Tarek at the central fire, wearing the red war sash openly now, a symbol of what she'd fought for and what she'd earned. Around her neck was a necklace Nalin had made, turquoise and silver in the Apache style. On her finger, Tarek's mother's ring caught the firelight. She looked nothing like the desperate woman who'd stepped off the train in Sentinel 5 months ago. That woman had been running from starvation and debt, hoping only for survival. This woman had found something more. Purpose. Family. Love. Kai raised a cup of water, the closest thing they had to wine. "To my brother, who refused to let our people disappear. To Elena, who proved that courage has no race. And to a future we build together." The camp echoed the toast, voices rising in unity. Later, as the fire burned low and people drifted to their shelters, Tarek took Elena's hand and led her away from the gathering. They climbed to their spot on the canyon rim, where they'd shared fry bread and watched the sunset months ago. "I have something for you," Tarek said, pulling a small bundle from his shirt. Elena unwrapped it to find a leather journal, hand-bound and beautiful. Inside, the first page was covered in Tarek's careful handwriting. "The Story of How We Survived," by Tarek Ashwolf and Elena Hartwell Ashwolf. "I want to write it down," Tarek said quietly. "Everything that happened, everything we fought for, so that when our children ask how their parents met, we can show them that love and courage can change the world." Elena's throat closed with emotion. Our children? If you want them, if you would build that future with me. She kissed him, pouring 5 months of struggle and survival and choosing each other into it. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, I want everything with you. Children, a life, a legacy, all of it. They sat together writing in the journal until the stars wheeled overhead, telling the story of a preacher's daughter and an Apache leader who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The weeks that followed were not easy. The agreement with the territorial government had to be implemented, which meant constant negotiation and adjustment. Some settlers remained hostile, some Apache remained suspicious. There were setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed like everything might collapse. But slowly, steadily, things changed. Apache scouts tracked down an outlaw gang that had been terrorizing the territory for months, earning grudging respect from settlers. Tarek mediated a water dispute between two ranchers, preventing violence. Elena started teaching English to Apache children and Apache language to settler kids, building bridges one word at a time. 6 months after the treaty was signed, the territorial newspaper ran a front-page story about the Apache experiment, examining whether cooperation between cultures could actually work. The reporter interviewed settlers who'd hired Apache scouts, Apache families who'd started trading with town merchants, and children who played together despite their parents' prejudices. The article ended with a quote from Elena. We were told that our people could never live together in peace. We were told that the differences were too great, the hatred too deep. But we've proven that when you choose courage over fear, when you choose partnership over domination, impossible things become possible. The story spread across the territory, then to other territories, then all the way to Washington. Politicians debated it. Churches discussed it. Other Apache bands sent delegations to see if the model could be replicated. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. Prejudice and violence didn't disappear just because treaties were signed. But it was progress. Real, measurable progress. A year after Elena stepped off the train in Sentinel, she stood before the Apache camp with Tarek at her side. But this time, it wasn't a desperate arrival or a political negotiation. It was a wedding. Not the hurried contract that had bound them initially, but a real ceremony that blended Apache traditions with ones Elena remembered from her childhood. Nalin had made her a dress, white cotton embroidered with turquoise thread. Kaya had woven flowers into her hair. Kai stood beside his brother, solemn and proud. Marshal Crawford was there, representing the territorial government. The store owner from Sentinel had come, bringing gifts. Ranchers and farmers stood beside Apache families. Everyone gathered to witness something they'd never thought they'd see. Tarek wore traditional Apache clothing, leather and silver and red fabric that marked him as a leader. But around his neck was a simple cross on a chain, the one Elena's father had given her, which she'd passed to Tarek as a symbol of their joined lives. They exchanged vows in both English and Apache, promising to stand together through whatever came. When Tarek kissed her, the camp erupted in cheers, Apache ululations mixing with settler applause in a sound that would have been impossible a year ago. At the feast afterward, as Elena danced with her husband under the desert stars, she thought about how far they'd traveled. Not just in miles, but in understanding, in courage, in love. She'd come here with nothing, expecting nothing, hoping only to survive. Instead, she'd found a home, a purpose, a man who saw her as an equal partner, not property or burden. And together, they'd done what everyone said was impossible. They'd built a bridge between worlds and proved that peace was stronger than hate when people were brave enough to fight for it. "What are you thinking?" Tarek murmured, pulling her closer as they swayed to the music. Elena looked up at him, at the man who'd given her a choice when she had none, who'd kept every promise, who'd shown her what real strength looked like. "I'm thinking that I'd make the same choice again, 1,000 times over. Even knowing how hard it would be? Especially knowing how hard it would be. Because you were worth it. This was worth it." He kissed her forehead, and she felt his smile against her skin. "Then we are both lucky, because I feel the same." They danced until the fires burned low and exhaustion claimed the revelers one by one. As they walked to their shelter, hand in hand, Elena looked back at the camp, at Apache and settlers talking quietly by the dying fires, at children sleeping peacefully side by side, at a future they'd built from nothing but courage and stubborn hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be people who hated what they'd built, who wanted to tear it down. The fight for peace was never truly over. But tonight, under the desert stars, surrounded by people who'd become family, Elena allowed herself to believe in miracles. Because she was living proof that they existed. She was the girl who'd stepped off a train into hell and found heaven in the most unexpected place. The woman who'd chosen love over fear, courage over safety, partnership over possession. And she had changed everything. The story of Tarek and Elena Ashwolf would be told for generations, a testament to what could be built when people refused to accept that hatred was inevitable, when they chose to see each other's humanity instead of their differences. It would be told in Apache lodges and settler homes, in school books, and around campfires. A story of survival and sacrifice, of choices made in impossible circumstances, of two people who looked at a divided world and decided to build something better. Years later, when their children asked how it all began, Tarek and Elena would pull out that leather journal and tell them the truth. Not a sanitized fairy tale, but the real story, complete with fear and blood and moments of despair. But also with the truth that love, real love, was powerful enough to change the world when people were brave enough to fight for it. And every time they told it, they would end the same way. With Elena smiling at Tarek and saying, "I stepped off that train expecting nothing. Instead, I found everything." And Tarek taking her hand and replying, "We both did, and we built it together." Because in the end, that was the real miracle. Not that peace was achieved, but that it was chosen, over and over again, by two people who refused to let hatred win. And that made all the difference.